Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Sunday. Good afternoon in Oklahoma. Good evening in London. London's calling. I was watching. So yes, I got the shot, the booster shot, and on Friday morning, because I'm kid free. Holy moly. That thing knocked me out. I originally got the Johnson & Johnson, and that made me really nauseous. And then I got, I guess, the Modena, I don't know, booster. And man, that thing got me I had the chills and couldn't get warm, couldn't get cold. It was crazy. So I'm just kind of bouncing back from the booster shot blues, I guess. Anyhow, yeah, it's crazy here. My daughter, Minnie, her school's just her daycare just shut down for 10 days because of COVID, and I don't know how we're all doing this, How are we doing this? I know in the beginning of the whole COVID thing, I was thinking everybody got to feel, I was like, this is how I feel all the time, crazy, But now it's extra crazy. So yeah, there we go. Well, I like to see you guys all greeting each other on the messages there. It's like Sunday morning. Turn to your neighbor and say hello. Good morning. Turn to the person next to you. I'd always whenever they would say that, I'd be sitting there and people would always Jay, good morning, Jay, at church. Good morning. I'd be like, one day I'll pastor a church so I never have to say good morning to anyone ever else. I don't ever have to greet my neighbor ever again. And then, you always get the one person who's like, I'm going to go hug Jay. But thank you for passing the peace this morning, everyone. So we're hitting Galatians. So we have got Galatians going on. And this is the big one for me. If I somehow won the lottery or something, I would still do Galatians. You know what I would do if I won the lottery? I would just fly around and speak on Galatians. And I would like to write a book on Galatians. My last book used the skeletal structure of Galatians. But I would love to just write a book on Galatians. So if you guys know any book companies out there who want to give me a 2-book deal, because I've got another idea for another book, maybe 3 actually, let me know. Also working on some really cool stuff this year with Mr. Rollins. But anyhow, we're on Galatians. And so I've been thinking a lot about Galatians as I do. And usually when you start the series is when you kind of go into the deep dive, the history and things like that. But I think around maybe Galatians 4, maybe 3 or 4, we go through a lot of history. And I think we're going to try to hit some of the history there. And that's on purpose. This is, to me, this is Paul's, the apostles' pet sounds, this is Paul's best work. For you 70s kids, Achtung Baby. So let's talk about a little bit why the book of Galatians is important today. There's a lot of books in the Bible and a lot of things like that are seen as timeless. And Galatians, for me, always seems to be timely. Like, it always seems to not just be timeless, but almost timely. Like, it does this evolution of with us. It grows with us. It is there with us. And it's really, to me, really a marvelous book. And I really do believe it's Paul's best writings. The book that inspired the Reformation, the book that inspired me to stay in the church and to do what I do now, and continue to do this work. And it's always driven me. I think it is the defiant book on grace. It's the definite book. I mean, it just defines, for me, defines grace. Why is it important in the year 2022 more than ever? Sounds such a cliche thing to say, but it's more important than ever. But it really continues to stretch us, to help us grow. And what Galatians does, and I hope with this series, this part, I don't know how many times I've done the series, but is something that will continue to challenge us and grow, and get us beyond our comfort zones and get us beyond ourselves. I believe this book does that. Because if you think about it right now, we have, in the States, and I even think probably outside of the States, we have divided nations, divided countries, divided communities. We've politicized an epidemic, which is really wild. So, and now we get all this different information depending on what news channel you watch, or what, who you subscribe to, or who you listen to. And so we're very divided. Divided with COVID, divided with politics, divided with wealth. The gap between poor and rich just continues to get bigger. And Galatians is about a divided community, really at the brink of war. And I think if we take seriously everything that's going on right now, it's like I feel sometimes we could be on the brink of a civil war, especially with some of the research I've done on places, Belfast, which is like my home away from home, and things like that. And so it makes me nervous. But when I look at Galatians, I see Paul is, like this voice in the wilderness, this crazy letter that he's writing. And it has so many different, it's not a long letter. And here you have this short letter to this broken, divided community that is not only trying to bring the community together, but he's also trying to prove himself. And he's trying to prove himself to his own community. Because what you have is Jewish Christians, who were called Judaizers at the time, and the Gauls, which are seen as Gentiles, non-Jews. And they're both holding on to their life identity, their identities as communities, their identities as human beings, what they're known for, what they've believed their whole life. This is not something to be taken lightly, folks. This is, I think we look at it and go like, oh, well, they're just having to kind of deal with their religious belief system. But I mean, look at how we deal with that in this country, or how all over the world, how we deal with difference of religious beliefs. Unfortunately, it usually ends in war. And these also, you have a situation, and it reminds me, especially in, I mean, it's been forever, but especially when things kind of hit the head in the late 90s, early 2000s with the LGBTQ community in the church. You have this group of people who want to be Christians, who want to be a part of the church, who want to be a part of this religion, wanting to be there. And then you have the kind of gatekeepers going like, well, you have to do A, B, or C, or you have to give up this, or you have to practice this. And they're going like, but how does that Christianity? And they're going, well, Christianity is a part of Judaism. So you have these people who are deeply embedded in their belief system. And it's not just their belief system, but it is literally their identity. It is literally who they are. It is their race. For the Judaizers, it's not just about identity as much. I mean, they're the chosen people, and they're going like, how are we going to let these people who are, they're not supposed to be chosen. I mean, you really have people who are being forced to stretch outside of all their comfort zones and being asked to put their identities, who they are, to put those down for a side and listen to reason. And now you have Paul, who was a Pharisee, a Jewish Pharisee who was really well respected amongst his own folks, coming back in to say, okay, let me prove to you that I'm not only just really what a great Pharisee he is, but now he's having to prove to himself, prove to everyone what a good Christian he is. That he's actually follows Christ, and that he's actually hearing from Christ, and that he's actually called by Christ. So you have like a very familiar situation that we all see constantly of like, he's trying to prove, well, I'm a real Christian. But the cool thing that is happening here with Paul is he's not going, I see someone just asked a question, or what are Judaizers? Jewish Christians in Galatia, living with the Gauls, who believe that Christianity and Judaism are like this, but they also still believe that you have to practice particular aspects of the law, particularly circumcision and food sacrifice to idols, and certain holidays. And they feel like this is a vital thing. And you've got the Gauls, who, interestingly enough, are dealing with body things as well, because they're warriors. They're known as a warrior culture, warrior group. And these are people who literally go to war with a shield and a sword and are naked. Like if you see naked battle statues from 2,000 years ago, it likely is they're connected to the Gauls. Really interesting. So for them, circumcision and all this represents something completely different. So we really have a group of people who are completely divided, who want to share the same faith, but they're both arguing of like against each other. They're fighting each other. And you have Paul, who's having to come in and prove not only his Jewishness, but also his Christianness, his Christianity. He's having to prove himself worthy. And I don't know how many of us probably grew up in that type of Christianity where you kind of felt like you constantly had to prove yourself to be worthy. But here you have this leader who helped start this community, writing this letter, coming in to say, don't you remember who I am? Don't you remember what I'm doing? Because to some of them, it's important that Paul's hearing from Christ, because Paul's left, and now they're going like, well, he doesn't really know what's going on. He wasn't really one of the 12. So there's a group saying, maybe we should just kind of cancel Paul out. He's not really one of our leaders. He's not really an apostle. He wasn't a disciple, that walked with Jesus. So you have all this going on. So, think about everything that's going on in our world with divided community, how people think you're not a Christian if you do this, you're not this, that, or if you're vaccinated or you're not vaccinated, you're not this or that. If you're not this political party, you're not that political party. And how much we end up putting those things to our identity. How much we end up identifying with those things. Well, I'm this type of Christian. So what you have is a group saying, well, we're Jewish Christians, and then you have another group just saying, well, we're just Christians. We don't have Judaism, so this is just Christianity to us. And so you have these two groups coming together, and they're very divided. They're going after one another to the point where Paul is worried that this whole community is going to be devoured and destroyed by each other, by these disagreements. And so you have Paul coming in and doing something that what we talk about at Revolution a lot is asking these folks to disagree well. And another thing that I think we have to look at before we get into this book is I like P. Rollins' radical theology because it always takes a step back. It always looks at it looks at things in a radical different way, in a unique perspective. And then I like to think about Hegel and things like that, and Tillich and things like that. I mean, I really think what Paul is trying to do could be very reminiscent of what Dr. King was doing with the Poor People's Campaign. Trying to build a community of people who are being hurt and trying to say, you guys have got to see past certain things with each other. You have to see past these things in order to work together. So we also have to look at words like compromise, and we also have to look at other words like someone just asked who Hegel is. Hegel is a philosopher, very old philosopher. I don't remember what century he was from, but I can get that for you. But so we have to look at words like contradiction and almost like that is a different way to look at that, and not a bad way. And compromise and not such a negative way. German theologian Hegel. He was Lutheran, probably 200 years ago, I think. Sorry, I'm just trying to think that out loud. So this is what's going on here. Is you've got these different ways of thinking that Paul's bringing to them, saying, hey, listen, I want you guys to think differently, but I also want you to see things like these contradictions is not the end all of end. I'm wanting you not to see compromise as a bad word. And I feel like as in this time and age that those are two words that we see as horrible words. I had a little necklace made that says contradiction on it because I've really learned that sometimes two things that don't agree with each other sometimes bring together a higher truth. And I've learned that through reading philosophy. But I've also learned that through dialectic behavioral therapy. He was born, 1770. Thank you. 17. And he died 1831. So Hegel was born in 1770, died in 1831. There you go. I knew I thought I had it there. My dyslexia makes numbers and dates and all this stuff just go bloop. So you have to forgive me. My learning disabilities sometimes get the best of me. But what he says is what's important for me. But so here we go. We've got these different ideas, these different concepts, this huge group within divided against each other. And Paul is trying to bring peace through them realizing who they are and who they're supposed to be. Can Paul help them, these folks, find common ground to keep them from canceling each other out, or worse? And so that's kind of where we're going in with Galatians. So we're going to start with Galatians 1 and try to get through that. I don't want to keep you guys here all day, but I felt like that opening, just kind of a little bit of an introduction, is a good place. I will hit you with some dates and different things like that and some customs down the road, but I think it's more powerful if we do it probably around Galatians, probably around Galatians 3, to be honest with you. And some of you already know what I'm referring to if you've gone to these, attended one of my Galatians series on Galatians before. But let's get into it, kind of reflect and look at it. What is Paul doing? What's going on? So we've got all this stuff going on. Paul, an apostle, sent neither by human commission nor from human authority, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the members of God's family who are with me, to the church of Galatia. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, whom gives himself for our sins and sets us free from this present evil age, according to the will of God the Father, to whom the glory forever and ever. Amen. Now, if you notice, automatically Paul is saying, I don't come from human authority. Because that is, who's ever reporting back to Paul or writing Paul is basically saying, like, listen, they're doing everything they can to discount you because they want to they feel like the Gauls, in order to be real Christians, have to keep Jewish tradition. And for the folks who are, the Judaizer folks are, I mean, you can't blame them because they've grown up their whole life Jewish, waiting for the Messiah. The Messiah comes. For them, it's not a new religion. To them, it's just the Messiah has come. So for them, they're just going, well, this is just a continuous of our faith. And I think it was very hard when Jesus would say stuff like, you've heard it said about the law, and then said, but I say, and he would change the law. This is very hard stuff to deal with. Do you think if let's, for argument's sake, get really crazy and say Jesus came back and started saying, oh, well, you've heard it said that, do this or this. Well, I say don't do this, and changed things in the Bible and disagreed with the Bible. I mean, I get you. There's Christians who would be like, oh, nope, sorry, Jesus, you're misguided, because honestly, Bibleatry is one of the biggest things I see. Like, people, Jesus, buddy, if you don't add up with this, man, we're going to have to, even Jesus was deceived. I mean, I really think that that's how some people work. And two, because, if you spent your whole life following these regulations and these rules, and they become such a part of you and so important to you and so developed in your image and your understanding of what God is, all of a sudden it's going like, wait, this doesn't make sense. Wait, I've done this my whole life. So what I'm trying to do is build a little empathy, a little sympathy for both sides. Because then you have this other guy going, well, wait a second, we don't have that part of your faith. We just want, we're looking at Christianity as something new and great. And of course, Paul messes the whole thing up by saying, Gentiles can be Christians too. This isn't just a Jewish religion. This is a faith for all people. So you have very huge reformation happening here. So that's why Paul's trying to say, well, this is where I come from. Galatians 1:6 says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, because I'm sure that's what they, what people are arguing is that this is another, I think what's happening is they're saying the Judaizers are practicing another gospel, and I think the Gauls are saying, and they're saying about the Gauls are doing another gospel. They're both probably arguing who's doing another gospel. So Paul's greeting and then right into it. I'm shocked. What are you doing? What the hell's going on here? So he goes, I'm astonished that you embrace Christ and the truth is a different God, that you're following a different gospel. that there is not that there is another gospel, but there are some who confuse you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should proclaim to you a gospel contrary to what proclaimed for you, let that one be accursed. As we have said before, so now I repeat, if anyone proclaims you a gospel contrary to do what is received, let that one be accursed. Now, accursed, the due penalty, anyway, we can get into that a little bit more in a minute. But let's look at 10. Because this is Paul goes right into it. He confronts the issue, and then he automatically goes and confronts. He goes, "You're doing another gospel," and then he defends himself again. Am I now speaking human approval or God's approval, or am I trying to please people? If I were still pleasing people, I would not be a servant of Christ. So that's what's happening also is, and I love this, and this verse has always really meant a lot to me. 119 110 is because Paul is saying, like, you guys are, because he's being accused of people pleasing. He's saying you're trying to, and you'll see this sometimes even with him and James and their falls outs and different books when some people say this and some people say Paul's teaching this and they try to correct Paul. It's very interesting to see the inter squabbles in the Bible. And so what Paul is being accused of, because the message of grace for him is such a powerful thing and such a huge radical shift, people are saying you're trying to please people. You're trying to be a people pleaser. You're trying to tickle their ears. And for me, I like that Thomas just asked, could Paul have done a little bit more personal grace? I don't know if Paul could have or not. But I think what Paul's trying to, if Paul could have shown more grace or not with this, is because he goes in and he delivers a book that's so clearly a message of grace. And honestly, I don't think there's a better book in the Bible that explains grace, that I think he shows as the humanity that sometimes, and it's a short letter, and it shows, I think it shows to the community how passionate and how worried he truly is about the community. I think he's really trying to explain to the community, like, I'm afraid. And as we go deeper into the letter, you realize what he's afraid of. And he's not saying I'm necessarily afraid of myself. What I'm afraid of is that you guys are going to destroy one another. And so he's about to say some really radical stuff. And it might be, too, that when the folks are reading this letter, that Paul, in some ways, is becoming a common, like, they're all feeling a little bit by Paul. It could be something that brings them together as a community, going like, well, yeah, that letter was a little, was he talking to you? Was he talking about the goal? Was he talking about, it could have been that type of thing. I don't know. But Paul could be quite the roller coaster if you read a lot of his writings, all of a sudden you think, there's no grace at all, and like, you're right. And he's pulling the rug out from under our feet. He tricked us, and then boom, right back into grace, So Paul can be a bit of a roller coaster. And interesting enough, he may have had a learning disability or a sight problem. Most of his letters were dictated. So I always picture Paul, on our ad, we had a picture of Paul writing, but I always picture Paul like pacing in a room. My buddy Pete always paces in a room in his shoes, and he's like, click, 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 click. When I'm on the phone, I'm like, dude, are you training horses or something? And I always just see like Paul pacing in a room. No, hold on, scratch it out. This, because when he gets really intense, he'll go and write in his own handwriting. But what I love about grace is that like grace is the reality of accepting yourself where you're at. It's not accepting yourself as that you can be better. It's accepting yourself even when you're not feeling good. It's accepting you are accepted even when others find you unacceptable, and even if you find yourself unacceptable. So in some ways, it's almost like the trick that Paul pulls in Romans when he's like, the big Romans 1 where everybody's like, oh, anti-gay, and that is this, and this, and he goes, oh, and you say, and then in Romans 2, he's like, what horrible people I'm speaking of, and then he just turns around and goes, and you're just as bad because you judge them. I mean, he just, boop, flips it around. So all of a sudden, all these people are feeling horrible, and then he goes over and says, and all these people are feeling righteous, and then as soon as they hear, you're just as bad. What? I'm just as bad because I judge them? I like that Thomas says, to me, grace is the most pure expression of love. Yeah, but, and I agree but sometimes love gets passionate. Sometimes love has to fight. Sometimes love has to argue when you never give up. I think Dr. King was a fine example of pure love and pure grace. But there were times where he said things that were harsh, to a lot of Christians as well, to a lot of people he worked with, to a lot of progressive Christians, he would call people out. And that's the thing is, like, I also like the idea with the book of Paul. It's almost like a human being, and you have to give the book grace like you do a person, is you can't just go like, oh, I'm going to look at Paul for what he's saying just here. It has to say, let's finish the story. David Bazan used to have a song, and then one of the lyrics was, save your applause till the end of the show. Let's see who I really am at the end of the show. So let's get to the end of the show. Let's just get to the end of chapter 1. But he goes, I like this part in 10. I'm gonna nail on it a little bit more. Am I now seeking human approval or God's approval? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still pleasing people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And so for me, in the early 2000s, when I was like, oh, I'm an ally, I'm affirming of my LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and so many preachers were like, oh, you're tickling ears. You're tickling ears. You're just trying to be a people pleaser. You're just trying to win you're just trying to make the world happy. I'm like, well, that's great, because if I am, because you guys all pulled out your support, so I just had to let my whole staff go. So yeah, I really hope that my ears are tickling ears, making people happy. I'm like, no one was damn happy. It wasn't like there was a revival overnight, and I just had a gigantic church because I was this happy, affirming Christian. Anybody who knows who's done that type of work knows that that's not how to get rich quick, by doing work with the marginalized. That's not you kind of have to give a more of a happy message rather than, hey, we're all going to have to learn how to work together and figure this out. But, I've been approved of people pleasing myself, and it's just so crazy that what people think is people, and it shows that when someone disagrees with us theologically, then they just go, well, you've just made that up. And there's no room for disagreeing well. There's no room for finding if there's truth in that, or even a higher truth in the two things that we're bringing together or arguing together. If there's something higher in the contradiction, a piece in the contradiction. But even grace may be grace is such an amazing thing, because I think it's not love, it's beyond love. And I think that would be a good talk. So if you remind me of that, I will do a talk, and we will compare grace and love together, but you're going to have to remind me. Here Paul says in 11, for I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel that was proclaimed to me is not of human origin. For I did not receive it from human sources, nor was I taught it, but I received it through revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, I will tell you what, if you want to lose a theological argument, if you want to get laughed out of almost any church, tell them that you felt like God spoke to you. I one time I said it willy-nilly, not even thinking about it, because I just grew up evangelical, and people were like, well, what about it? And I'm like, well, I just feel like God spoke to my heart. And I've never had so many people who probably said that a million times turn and go, oh, so God whispered in Jay's ear, and now he's a special messenger. So if you think about this, I'm sure Paul is dealing with that type of things constantly. Like, oh, so, the 12 are okay, but God chose you and spoke to you. Why weren't you around when Jesus was here? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, all of a sudden they're like, so if you ever say God, you heard from God, no one respects that. But it's in the Bible, so it gets respect. So we have to just deal with that. There you go. I love it, because Paul is one to make very clear that God is no respecter of man. And but we act as though God has special people who God communicates and lays things on their hearts and things like that. So anyway. Or maybe it's all bullshit. You have to have all these contradictions. You have to hold these and look at these and think critically. Question these things. But for I want you to know, brothers and sisters, I did not receive it from human source, nor it was revelation of Christ, through Christ. You have heard no doubt of my earlier life in Judaism. I was violently persecuting the church of God and was trying to destroy it. So Paul goes right into testimony time. And this is why Paul is such an interesting character, is he goes like, guys, you think your whole thing about like wanting them to be circumcised is a big deal. When I was Jewish, when I was a Pharisee, when I was a teacher, I was killing them. I was having Christians killed. I was having Christians' lives taken. I was watching them burn during parties, because that happened. They'd be used to light parties. Hey, just in case you're thinking about converting to Christianity at this party, here's a reason not to. It's pretty disgusting, pretty sick, and I just don't think we realize that the suffering and the horrificness and the horror and the humanity that was a part of this, and that we separate Bibles, these things as just good stories, just a good story. And we don't realize that there's actual history there, that these things, took place. Whether it was the Son of God or not the Son of God is a whole nother argument. But this was a part of history. For I want you to know, brothers, okay, we already did that. So know about, I was violently persecuting the church of God. So here you have someone coming in going like, not only, am I trying to say, hey guys, because right now what his part is probably the Judaizers, the Jewish Christians are saying, Paul, you can't let them get away with this stuff. And Paul's going like, hey, listen, I get it, because I know where you come from. I wanted to destroy the whole church. I wanted all Christians gone. I probably would have killed you as well. Paul's saying like, I was so fervent that I would have killed you. Not just them. I didn't want anybody in. And this is the change that Christ has had in my life, has allowed me to not only love my neighbor as myself, but also love my enemy and realize that we're all included, that we're all one. And so this is revolutionary stuff happening. This is real. This is the real idea of Christianity, whether you think of it's sent by God or just a religion. But the fact is this is the message of the Christian, of the Christianity, of the church, is this acceptance. So there you go. So if you want to follow the Christian tradition, part of that tradition is realizing who we are as a community and what we're called to. It's so funny. I hate that I have the numbers up here, because I literally just saw us drop like 10 people. And they probably all had to go to the bathroom or go do something else or check their Instagram. I'm just saying, it gets a little weird. I need to figure out a way to turn the numbers off so I don't look at that. I'm like, oh, they're mad at me. I used to like always focus on one person when I would be talking, and then like the person who looked like they disproved the most, and then you talk to them afterwards and they're like, I just loved it. And you're like, oh, they were just intensely, you just have, resting like judgment face. That was fantastic. Anyway, I advanced in my Judaism beyond many among my people of the same age, for I was far more zealous for the tradition of my set that set me apart before I was born, and pleased to reveal his son to me. But do you hear what he's saying? He's saying, I was the best at what I did. I was the best at my religion. I was beyond most people my age. I mean, he's bragging about, and this is the interesting thing about Paul. So I really think what Paul's trying to do is say, listen, I've been there. I've been a part of this. So I think it's tough to think about if people came out of those opposite communities that we disagree with, and then that person comes over and is changed and now is a leader amongst our community, and then he's trying to communicate and bring in the other people from the community, like bring us all together. You're going like, what is happening? There are some people who believe that Paul came to destroy Christianity. Literally, like Paul came to destroy Christianity. For I was far more zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. But when God, who had me set apart before I was born and was called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his son to me, so that I might proclaim him amongst the Gentiles, I did not confer with any human beings, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were already apostles before me, the 12. But I went away at once into Arabia, and afterwards I returned to Damascus. Yeah, now we're all looking at the numbers. Where are you going? No, they're going up. They're going down. Sell, buy, buy. But, so what you have here is so interesting, because it's like he's going like, yeah, you're right. I didn't go talk to the 12. I was an awesome Jewish teacher. I was one of the best. And I got converted. Christ called me. And instead of going to talk to the 12, I went off on my own and I prayed some. Could you imagine him trying to argue with theologians like this? And what I'm trying to argue here is that we've got to learn sometimes to think differently. The reason I do what I do and I don't have a church of 10,000 probably is because my mind works really different. It's not crazy, but it may be a little bit crazy. But my mind works, I put things together differently, I see things differently, and I explain things in a unique way. It probably comes from punk rock upbringing, my parental upbringing, and my learning disabilities, so I learn in different ways. And I find it to be more artistic than like theological sometimes. But it is all very, the foundation is very theological, I believe. And I would be glad to debate theologians anytime. So he goes and goes, then after 3 years, I did go up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. But I did not see any other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. And those two kind of had issues, James and Paul. Very interesting. But he's like, I went to see Cephas and I didn't see anybody else but James, and he's like, oh, I'm going to reach the Gentiles, James. And James wasn't like the biggest fan of Gentiles. So you kind of have this weird thing where Paul's just like, this is who I am. It's funny, my mom wrote this book called I Gotta Be Me, and I remember this Christian writer saying how unchristian he thought it was. And it was a guy who was like very progressive, which was really surprising to me, how unchristian it would be to say you gotta be me because you have to die to yourself. But I don't think he understood what dying to yourself meant, or what getting to have to be true to who you are it means either. When being true to who you are is loving other people. So I went and saw Cephas and stayed with him for 15 days, but I did not see any of the other apostles except James, the Lord brother. And what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. When I went into the region of Syria and Cilicia, I was still unknown by sight to the church of Judea that are in Christ. They only heard it said, the one who formerly was persecuting us is now proclaiming the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of me. That must be interesting to walk into a group and hear them talking about you. And interesting enough, yeah. I kind of had that when I went to the Eyes of Tammy Faye premiere. I was talking to some drag queens, and they didn't realize who I was. And I was like, oh, yeah, my mom used to have a dress like that. No, yeah, my mom had a hair like that. And they all thought I was giving them shit. They thought I was taking the piss. And they were kind of mean to me, so I had to go back. I was like, oh, they're kind of snotty. And then I go, oh, they don't know who I am. And I had to go back to the drag queen and go, hey, when I met my mom is Tammy Faye. Like, it was a compliment. Like, I wasn't saying, like, I wasn't making fun of you, So it is interesting when you do get into a place where people don't know who you are, what you do. Or like when I got to after the premiere party and I sat at a table and there was a group next to us discussing the movie but talking about my parents in a not very positive way. I had to go over and go, hey, I'm their son, and if you want to talk about it, you can come over and talk to me. But if you're going to talk like this, you guys just move, being a little quieter, moving down, or I can move, Anyway, but this is really cool, and I think we're going to end on Galatians 1 today. Keep this series chronological. But the one who formerly, and I like how it goes, when I was still unknown in the church of Judea, he's saying, like, I was at the church of Judea and they were really happy about my conversion. He's still showing, like, hey, okay, I didn't go straight to the apostles, you're right. But then what Paul does is that little turn he always does. He's kind of like Pete Rollins does sometimes, like the M. Night Shyamalan twist. But then he goes, but 3 years later, I did go and see the disciples. So he goes, but then I did. And so, because it's almost in a way where people are going like, oh, we got him. And then he goes, but then I didn't go. Oh, we didn't get him. And he does have to say that he will eventually say, yeah, they gave me their approval to do this work. If that's what really matters to you, yes, I do have that. But then he goes, but it's not really that big of a deal to me. I don't care. I would do this with them or without them. But if rules and regulations are what's valuable to you, here, I went through them. I did them. So are you happy? But I was so confident in my calling that these didn't matter. I mean, could you imagine some speaker, some pastor coming along and talking like that today? We wouldn't accept it. So we say we're people of faith, but really we're people of a book that we treat like a law book or a science book rather than a collection of letters put together, and probably don't make room for today's apostles anymore. I'm sorry, I gotta just go back one thing. Andre says, I still say most likely not. I don't think Paul was about slamming people. I don't think Paul was about slamming people either. I actually don't even, I believe the pastoral epistles are forgeries, and that's important for me because those pastoral epistles undo all the work done here in Galatians, like really undo a lot of that work and set up a new form of new structure of religion and law. It's like, oh, Paul changed his mind and became, maybe I wasn't right about the neither Jew nor Gentile thing, male or female thing. So what we have here is an opening to our letter, and as much as Paul does, he takes us on this journey of this letter that, and here is, to me, the best letter written about grace is a rebuke letter to a community. So that's got to speak to us. that grace is something else. That grace isn't just like, but grace is coming in and going like, listen, there's something not here. Grace is willing to sit down and have a hard talk. Grace is willing to write a hard letter. You know, it's willing to say like, let's lay the cards on the table. But ultimately, let's show grace, but we have to lay the cards on the table. So grace isn't ignoring the situation. Grace isn't just going like, well, we'll just let them kill each other because God loves them. He'll figure it out. You know, it's not that. You know, grace is going in and going, I'm going to come in and be a peacemaker. I'm going to show you guys that you're all really accepted and that this is, but it's going to be tougher for you to accept that you're accepted. You know, I mean, he's going to tear down all the hierarchy and lowarchy of the system. And, but he does it through saying, but you have to accept this. You have to die to yourself. You have to die to your identity. And, you know, you're not going to get very popular if you, in 2022, if you go on Facebook or you know, Twitter or Instagram and tell people like, hey, we're all one. You know, let's just deny, you know, there's neither male nor female, Jew nor, you know, slave or free, straight or gay or Republican or Democrat. We're just all one. You know, and people go, oh, but you know, people fight against it. So this letter is not an easy letter. Because Paul tries to even the playing field and nobody wants to even the playing field. I don't think the Gauls are necessarily, you know, are going to get what they want. I don't think the Judaizers are necessarily going to get what they want. But Paul is asking for people to live in a community. He's saying there are no identities in Christ. You can keep those things that are important to your identity, spoiler alert. But you can't put those on other people. So there you go. You know, it's like that's what we're going to get into. You know, we're going to get into some radical grace. Then I think the only way to allow these shifts to happen is by letting go, by accepting grace for yourself, and only then can you show grace to others, and that type of way. But it's very, very difficult to do. I'm hoping, like as we go through this series and this study, that I'm going to come out a better person. I literally have some people in my life right now that I'm having a very hard time letting go. And for me, sometimes it's like I take in and think I'm bad. So like if people reject me, I sometimes try to rationalize it as that I'm a bad person. So then I have to give myself grace. You know, it's like this constant grace. And then how do you give grace to people who don't want to communicate with you and don't want to talk to you? How do we do that? So I'm hoping that when we go through this together, that I'm going to come out on the other side with a transformative grace as well. And I'm challenging myself to do that as well. So I hope you guys know that when we do this together, it's not me just like, I am the teacher and I know all. What I'm trying to do is think it through. So when I answer when I see your little question, when I see little questions because they're little, not because you're little, but when I see the questions come up on the screen here, and then sometimes I answer them right away, kind of. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. But it's because that's how my mind works. My mind is operating like, oh, does this add up to this? Does this work with this? Does this work with this? And that's how my mind works when I'm in the midst of speaking and communicating. That's why I like doing the Q&A. Yeah, John, good luck with that, buddy. I'm just kidding. No, it's tough. It's tough to accept that you're accepted. I will once again recommend that if anybody really wants to understand grace in a really beautiful way, I will give you something that's not in the canon, that's not in the Bible, that was written, not in the Bible, that was written, I think in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, or 60s by Paul Tillich. I think it was probably the 50s. You Are Accepted. It's a sermon that Paul Tillich gave. It's called You Are Accepted. It's in a book called Shaking the Foundations, but if you just Google Paul Tillich, You Are Accepted, that sermon comes up. It's not audio. It's just written out. But I one time recorded it, but I think we lost the recording of it. But reading that You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich is amazing. And it really helps you realize what grace truly is. And so if you want to really, one of what I think is best writings on grace, and maybe even gives Galatians a run for its money, is Paul Tillich's sermon, You Are Accepted. It's just phenomenal book on grace. And I think that's going to be my homework for you. If you want to continue in on this study with me, go read You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich. I think it will help you go through this book in a different way. Because I think that's what Paul's trying to help his community do. You got to remember, he had a relationship with his community. He knew the leaders in this community. He knew a lot of the people in this community. This community had helped him in a dark time as well. So he's not just randomly writing letters that he hears about communities. This was a community he was a part of. But he really is trying to say, like, guys, we're getting away from grace when we do all this infighting. Yes, Paul's letters were written closer to the resurrection, Thomas says, than any other books before the Gospels were recorded. Yeah, I mean, most theologians would tell you that Galatians is the earliest book we have to Jesus' life, earlier than any Gospels. So I think it's interesting, and if you're in linear is important to you, I think it's important to look at that. So that's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that up. I thought about it last night when I was thinking about this, and I didn't even bring it up. So thanks, Thomas. You're my very good partner in crime up here today, helping me get this study out. And that's how we do it. This is a community, and we work through it together. And I love that. I love it. That's what I want in this community, and I love that part. This is a great part about Revolution, man. You guys are awesome. You might not like each other if you started writing down what you believe about COVID or who you voted for. But even then, you probably agree to disagree or disagree well. And I love that. Because that's the goal of not just being, diverse in our lifestyles or in our skin colors or in things, but also diversity of our minds and our thoughts. Because that's how we grow as a community. And we challenge each other's thoughts. And we become better. And not that it's not about becoming better, but we become stronger. We have these conversations, and maybe we revolutionize the world and help people live well and live in community in a way that they never saw possible. And I think that's what this is calling us to. So, I mean, the book of Galatians could be written today to the Church of the United States. God, think about all the different denominations just trying to destroy each other. So, well, thanks for everybody for jumping in. I've gone to 12 straight up, so I think we'll leave it at that. But we will hit Galatians 2 next week, hopefully, because they did cancel my daughter's school. So I am going to have to find some babysitters and things like that so I can work a little bit more on this stuff, because I'm going to be dadding all next week unless unless something miraculous happens. So thank you, Reverend Thomas. And I enjoy jumping back into Galatians next week with you guys. Love you so much. Tell your friends about this, please. If you see it on Instagram, Instagram it, retweet it, Facebook it, whatever, share it, let people know, let your friends know, and all that good stuff. Someone asked why is school canceled, COVID outbreak in the daycare is what happened. So there you go, guys. Thank you so much. Love you all so much. This was a great day, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of this study. If it was me, we would just do this one over and over and over and over again. And I do that just a trickier way where we just use different verses, same message. Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.